It was just another late-night rehearsal inside Graceland, until the studio door creaked open. Elvis turned, expecting a sound engineer, but instead, a small voice began to sing his song. The cameras kept rolling. What unfolded next wasn't part of any set list. It was a moment between father and daughter that would outlive them both. The night outside was heavy with rain. Inside Graceland's private studio, a red recording light flickered like a heartbeat against the smoke-filled glass. Elvis sat at the piano, sleeves rolled to his elbows, hair slicked back, eyes half hidden behind tinted glasses. The session had stretched past midnight, but he wasn't ready to stop. The room smelled of warm amplifiers and coffee gone cold. Guitarist Charlie Hodge leaned against the wall, tuning strings by instinct more than sight. Glenn Hardin sat at the piano bench beside Elvis, his fingers resting on the keys, waiting for a cue that never came. A few crew members dozed near the mixing board. This was how Elvis worked. Restless, precise, always chasing a feeling. He was rehearsing separate ways. Not for a crowd this time, but for himself. The way his voice cracked on the chorus was deliberate, almost like he wanted the pain to echo off the walls. "Let's take it from the bridge," he murmured, his southern drawl soft but certain. Outside, thunder rumbled. The sound bled faintly into the tape as engineer Al Pachucky adjusted the knobs. A sign on the wall read TCB, taking care of business. It wasn't just a slogan. It was how he lived. Then a pause. Elvis leaned back in his chair and stared at the ceiling. "You know, Charlie," he said quietly, "sometimes these songs sound different when you sing them alone." Charlie smiled, sensing the weight behind the words. "That's 'cause you're thinking too much, E." Maybe he was. The king of rock and roll, adored by millions, alone in his mansion, singing about loneliness. There was something poetic in that. The faint hum of the tape machine filled the silence. Then 3 soft knocks on the studio door. Everyone turned. At first, Elvis thought it was Joe Esposito coming to remind him about tomorrow's photo call. But the door didn't open right away. Instead, there was a small, hesitant voice. "Daddy!" The entire room froze. Elvis blinked, smiled faintly, and motioned to Charlie to pause the tape. The heavy wooden door creaked open, and there she was, Lisa Marie, barefoot, hair tangled from sleep, a tiny stuffed rabbit clutched in one hand. She shouldn't have been awake at this hour. "What are you doing up, little girl?" Elvis asked softly, half laughing. "I heard you singing," she whispered. "I wanted to see." He sighed, then chuckled, a sound full of love and exhaustion. "Well, sugar, you came to the right place." Glenn Hardin slid off the bench, making space. Elvis patted the seat beside him. She climbed up, legs swinging, looking at the piano like it was some grand toy. The whole crew melted. For a brief moment, the king wasn't rehearsing, he was home. "Wanna sing with Daddy?" Lisa nodded eagerly, her voice barely a whisper. "Can I?" Elvis smiled, that iconic half-grin returning. "Honey, you already are." A quiet laugh rippled through the room. Charlie adjusted the mic stand, lowering it to her height. Cameras that had been left idling began to roll again, capturing what no one realized would become a piece of living history. Somewhere deep inside Graceland, time seemed to pause. The world outside didn't matter. And then she sang. Her first note was soft, shaky, but pure. The look on Elvis's face shifted instantly. Surprise, pride, maybe even awe. No one dared to interrupt. Even the thunder outside faded, as if the night itself was listening. It wasn't just rehearsal anymore. It was something sacred. What happened next, when that little voice found its rhythm, would melt every heart in the room, and years later, the world's too. The camera wobbled as it zoomed in. A single lamp glowed over the piano, its light catching the dust floating through the air like slow snow. Lisa Marie swung her feet, too small to touch the floor. Elvis leaned beside her, his voice calm, his presence magnetic even in stillness. "All right, sweetheart," he said quietly. "You start us off." For a second, she hesitated. Then that tiny voice, bright and untrained, filled the room with the opening line of "Don't Cry, Daddy." The first syllables trembled, half whisper, half courage. Elvis's eyes softened. His lips parted just slightly as if to sing with her. But he didn't. Not yet. He wanted to listen. Every crew member stopped what they were doing. Charlie Hodge froze mid-sip of coffee. Glenn Harden's hand rested on a single note that he never played. Even the wall clock ticked louder, each second stretching longer. That's the strange magic of moments like this. They don't shout. They whisper. Lisa's voice cracked on the third line, but Elvis smiled instead of correcting her. He nodded, steadying her rhythm with the tap of his finger against the piano top. "Take your time, honey," he murmured. "You're doing just fine." The tenderness in that one line, "you're doing just fine," said more about Elvis than any headline ever could. What does perfection mean when the heart behind it is already enough? He joined her softly on the chorus. The harmony was imperfect, the notes uneven, but together, they sounded alive. You can hear him laugh midway through the second verse, when she accidentally sings a line too early. Lisa covered her mouth, giggling. The band laughed too. Elvis shook his head, grinning. "You just couldn't wait, could ya?" Then he began again, slower this time. "Let's do it like a story, baby. Not just a song." She nodded, serious now, small hands folded in her lap. When she sang the next verse, her tone changed. Lighter, confident, like she finally understood she was part of something real. By the final line, "Daddy, please don't cry," the studio had gone completely silent. No applause. No direction. Just the hum of the tape running. Elvis closed his eyes. When he opened them, there was a quiet shine. The look of a man realizing that fame was temporary, but fatherhood wasn't. The engineer whispered to the camera operator, "Keep rolling. Don't stop." That line would become part of fan folklore decades later. Proof that even the people behind the scenes knew they were witnessing something sacred. When the song ended, Lisa looked up at her father. "Did I do good?" Elvis leaned down, kissed the top of her head. "You did perfect." He glanced at the red light glowing above the booth, the same one that had blinked through thousands of takes, and whispered, almost to himself, "That's the one we'll keep." How many treasures in life are born by accident, and yet last forever? Outside, the rain had stopped. In its place, a deep quiet, the kind that only follows something unforgettable. For the crew, it was another night on the clock. For Elvis, it was a night he'd remember until his final breath. He stood, stretched, and whispered to Charlie, "Let's call it a night." But Charlie, still watching Lisa, shook his head. You sure you want to stop there? She's just getting started." Elvis smiled, that faint glimmer of pride returning. "Yeah," he said softly, "and that's exactly why." None of them knew that the tape still rolling in that booth, the one labeled TCBD February 76, would become one of the most talked about bootlegs in music history. The next morning, sunlight crawled across Graceland's long hallway, lighting up the gold records that lined the walls. Most nights, the studio would rest after such a session, but not this one. Word had spread quietly among the crew. "He's playing the tape again." Inside the control room, the faint click of the reel-to-reel echoed. Elvis sat in his white rehearsal shirt, collar open, a coffee cup untouched beside him. On the monitors, his own voice and Lisa's rose in fragile harmony. He watched in silence. Engineer Al Pachucki, who'd recorded hundreds of Elvis takes, later said, "It wasn't the song that stopped him. It was the sound of her voice beside his." Elvis pressed the rewind button again. The tape whirred. Then he stood abruptly, eyes bright. "Let's do it again. This time live." The team exchanged looks. Charlie said. "You sure? She's just a kid." He smiled. "That's the beauty of it." By evening, the studio was lit again. No crowd, no reporters, just the family that made music together. Lisa came running in, hair brushed, wearing one of her father's scarves like a cape. "Daddy, are we singing again?" "Only if you promise not to beat me to the verse this time," he teased. Laughter rippled through the room. She grinned and leaned closer to the mic, whispering, "I'll try." When the red light flicked on, something changed. This wasn't a rehearsal anymore, it was communion. Elvis began with a slow hum, that deep honeyed tone that made even silence feel full. Then Lisa joined, her voice just slightly behind his, not polished, but honest. Together, they shaped a version of Don't Cry Daddy that no one had ever heard before. The song, written years earlier about heartbreak and loss, became something new in their hands. When Elvis sang, "Daddy, you still got me, little darling," and she softly echoed, "We'll find a brand new mommy," the meaning shifted. It wasn't about grief anymore. It was about healing. The musicians lowered their instruments out of respect. Even the air felt reverent. Can love rewrite the story a song was meant to tell? At the bridge, Elvis looked down at her. And for the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about the next show or the next record. He was just present. Lisa's laughter bubbled through one of the lines. The piano faltered. Everyone laughed. And that's when Elvis said the line that would later circle fan clubs worldwide. "Leave it. Don't stop. That's the take." It broke every rule of recording. But that's what made it magic. The reel kept spinning. On the control panel, the tape marked TCB D, February '76, filled another side. That raw, uncut track, imperfect and unedited, would survive long after the polished masters were forgotten. After the final note, silence. Then a single sound, Elvis laughing softly, almost shyly. "All right, Miss Presley," he said. "You're stealing my spotlight." Lisa giggled. "You said I could." That laughter stayed on the tape. Decades later, when audio engineers restored the session, they left it untouched. The imperfection was the soul of it. The next day, one of the cameramen, Bill Burke, approached Elvis privately. "Mind if I hold onto a copy of that reel, just for safekeeping?" Elvis hesitated, then nodded. "Sure, Bill. Just don't let the Colonel see it. He'll want to sell it before it's dry." They both laughed. But neither man realized that reel would become the only surviving visual of that moment. Isn't it strange how the things we mean to keep private often end up defining us most? Years later, fans would refer to it as the Graceland duet, though no one knew its full story. Bootleg copies surfaced across Europe in the late '80s, whispered about in Elvis fan circles as the tape he made for her. But on that February night, it was just a father and daughter, one teaching, the other discovering. Pan across empty Graceland studio, scattered lyric sheets. Mike Cable coiled like memory. Charlie Hodge would later say, "I've seen Elvis perform for 50,000 people, but I never saw him more alive than in that room with her." That's how moments become legend. Not through applause, but through truth. As the final chord faded, Elvis looked at Lisa and whispered something only the camera's mic barely caught. "Whenever I'm gone, remember." We sang it together. Promise sealed in music. That promise would resurface years later, when the forgotten footage, long buried in a dusty archive, was played again for the world. The camera's red light blinked again, unnoticed at first. Bill Burke, the visiting fan club journalist, had kept his 16mm camera rolling out of habit. He expected rehearsal footage. Instead, he captured something no broadcast stage ever would. Elvis was off guard now. Hair mussed, scarf hanging loose around his neck. Lisa was sprawled across the piano bench beside him, giggling as she swung her legs. The reel hummed, its tape gliding like a living heartbeat. "All right, one more for the road," Elvis said, voice low but playful. The crew leaned in, knowing this wasn't in the schedule. He started the intro to "Love Me Tender." The first chord rang, faint and aching. Lisa leaned closer, eyes wide, whispering, "That's my favorite." Elvis smiled. "Mine too, baby." The pair sang together, their voices barely above a lullaby. Bill adjusted the focus, the grain dancing across their silhouettes. Behind them, the Graceland curtains swayed with the draft. Outside, the rain returned, light and steady. Halfway through the second verse, something shifted. Elvis missed a note. He laughed it off, but his voice cracked. The kind of crack that carries years of exhaustion and tenderness. Lisa looked up at him, worried. "You okay, Daddy?" He nodded, swallowing a breath. Just fine, sweetheart. Keep going. That single exchange, 5 seconds on tape, would become the soul of the clip. How often does greatness reveal itself not in the perfect performance, but in the moments that nearly fall apart? The music slowed. Elvis wrapped an arm around her shoulders mid-song. She didn't miss a beat. Their heads touched. Bill Burke kept filming, trembling slightly. "You're getting this?" whispered Glenn Harden from the booth. "Every frame," Bill murmured. When they reached the final line, "And I always will," Elvis whispered, almost inaudible, "That's for you." He kissed the top of her head. Silence. Then applause, not from a crowd, but from the 3 people behind the console. A soft, spontaneous burst of sound that felt more human than any stadium roar. Charlie wiped his eyes. He said quietly. "You know that one ain't for the record books." Elvis laughed under his breath. "No," he said. "That one's for the heart." He reached over, stopped the tape, and said the words that would echo through every later documentary. "Keep it safe, boys. That one's just between us." But it wouldn't stay that way. 17 years later, that same reel, mislabeled and forgotten in a film canister marked Graceland's 76 B-roll, would be rediscovered in an attic in Memphis. A restoration team transferred the fragile footage to tape. When they pressed play, the image flickered. Elvis and Lisa, side by side, laughing. The engineer watching muttered, "My God, he's human." By 1993, the 16-second excerpt aired during an Entertainment Tonight tribute segment. Within days, fan clubs around the world flooded with letters. Newspapers called it the heart of Graceland. For fans who had only ever seen Elvis in glitter and spotlight, this was something else. A glimpse of the man behind the legend. Can a single moment of gentleness rewrite decades of myth? The clip became legend in its own right. VHS bootlegs sold in flea markets. Radio hosts described it with reverence, as if it were proof that even icons could love without audience. And every time the footage replayed, the grain, the light, the laugh, new generations felt it too. Editors later noticed something uncanny. Just before the song ends, the studio lights dim slightly, and a single frame catches Elvis looking directly into the camera, smiling, almost as if he knew. Maybe he did, because that look, half tired, half eternal, said what words never could. That this was the version of himself he wanted remembered. Lisa, years later, would recall, "I thought he was just being daddy. I didn't know the world would see it." And yet, that innocence is exactly what made the world stop watching the performer and start seeing the man. The legacy of that clip wouldn't end there. It would spark tributes, murals, even a bronze plaque in Studio B that reads, "Recorded here, the heart of Graceland, 1976. Every February, fans gather outside that studio, candles in hand, replaying those few seconds on loop. Each time, the silence after the last note feels heavier. Not sad, but sacred. And one day, decades later, Lisa would walk back into that same studio, carrying her father's microphone, to sing the song again. This time, she'd sing it for him. Graceland Studio B, January 2005, nearly 30 years had passed. The once bright studio was quiet now, its walls repainted but still holding the faint scent of old wood, tape, and time. The same upright piano stood in the corner, its ivory keys yellowed but untouched. The same instrument that had carried the lullaby of a father and daughter. Lisa Marie stepped inside slowly. A winter breeze followed her through the open door. She wore black, not for show but for memory. The technicians, older men now, lowered their voices. "Ready, Miss Presley?" one asked. She nodded. Her hand brushed the plaque on the wall, the one that read, "Recorded here. The heart of Graceland, 1976. "Let's roll it," she whispered. The tape began to play, the original duet crackled and imperfect. And there it was, her father's voice, tender as ever, coming through the speakers like a ghost wrapped in melody. Lisa closed her eyes. For a moment, she was 8 again. Sitting beside him, legs swinging, heart racing. The same warmth, the same laughter, the same feeling that the world had stopped just for them. Then she started to sing. Her adult voice, rich and weathered, met his younger one across the decades. It wasn't a duet anymore, it was a reunion. Can love really fade? Or does it just change its pitch with time? The sound engineer wiped a tear as he adjusted the levels. Charlie Hodge, long retired, sent flowers that morning with a note that read, "He be proud, darlin'." Lisa smiled through her tears. Every lyric carried the ache of memory. Every pause, a heartbeat she wished she could hear again. When she reached the line, "Daddy, please don't cry," her voice cracked, just like it had that first night in 1976. But this time she didn't correct it. She let it break. She let it be. Outside, fans stood by the gates of Graceland, candles in hand. Some held small radios playing the old recording. For them, this wasn't about fame, it was about connection. A journalist nearby murmured to his cameraman, "You can't script something like this." And he was right. Sometimes the truest performances are the ones no one planned to perform. Lisa's final note lingered in the room long after she stopped singing. She pressed her palm to the piano lid, whispering, "We did it, Daddy." The engineers stood in silence. Then one of them hit stop on the recorder. "What do you want me to name this file?" he asked quietly. Lisa smiled. "The Heart of Graceland Part 2. Her voice was steady, but her eyes shimmered. The footage of that session would later air at the 30th anniversary tribute concert in Memphis. Fans wept openly as her father's voice and hers echoed through the arena. 2 generations singing across time, one promise fulfilled. Maybe legacy isn't about how long people remember your name. Maybe it's about who keeps singing your song. When the final broadcast ended, the host simply said, "He sang to her once. Now, she sings for him." And in that closing silence, every person watching understood why that old, grainy clip still mattered. Not for the music, but for the love it carried. But before leaving the studio that night, Lisa placed one last thing beside the piano, a small stuffed rabbit, the same one she'd held the night she surprised her father. That night, after everyone left the studio, the lights dimmed once more. The reel kept spinning on the console, the same steady rotation that had carried their voices decades before. The rabbit sat on the piano bench, untouched. Outside, Graceland's front lawn glowed under the Memphis moon, the iron gates still bearing his initials, EP, like silent witnesses to everything that had unfolded inside. In that quiet, Lisa paused by the doorway. She looked back one last time and smiled, not with sorrow, but with peace, because in that room, she hadn't just honored a legend. She'd reunited with her father. Maybe that's what art really is, a way of keeping the people we love from disappearing completely. For fans around the world, the clip of that night and the story behind it became more than nostalgia. It became a reminder that the world's biggest stages mean nothing compared to the small rooms where love first finds its voice. Reporters would later write, "He gave the world his music. She gave the world his humanity." And that, perhaps, is how legacies survive, not through fame, but through the echoes of moments no one meant to record. When the final frame fades, there's no curtain call, no spotlight. Just 2 voices, one past, one present, meeting somewhere between memory and melody. And in that space you realize, greatness isn't measured by applause. It's measured by tenderness. The king didn't lose his crown that night. He passed it on quietly to his little girl. Outside Graceland, the candlelight vigils continue each year. Visitors still whisper about the clip that changed how the world saw him. Not as a performer, not even as a legend, but as a man who, for one small moment, forgot the world and remembered what mattered. Because the greatest songs ever sung are the ones sung with love. If this story moved you, share it with someone who still believes in timeless love. Not the kind on stage, but the kind that echoes forever in the quiet corners of our hearts.